Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you, Chris, so much for joining for this conversation today. And thank you to our audience, everyone who's joined us. As Joe said, I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Copia. And recently we published this report, the State of Industrial DevOps Workforce Report. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend checking it out. This conversation is going to touch on a lot of the key topics that we included. And I really appreciate having Chris here today because his experience dives deeply into the focus around workforce. And there's so many podcasts that he's hosted in the last 6 months, 12 months that we're going to be referencing throughout. So I also want to say, if you haven't checked out Manufacturing Happy Hour, I highly recommend it because it correlates so well to everything we're going to be talking about today. So before I start digging in with questions, Chris, I'd like to hand it over to you so you could do a quick intro beyond anything I've said.
Yeah, Jerry, thanks for having me here. Excited to be a part of the program. My name is Chris Luecke. I'm the host of the podcast Manufacturing Happy Hour. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, you name it. We're in all the main spots. And this is a project that started, close to 8 years ago at this point, where I realized there were a lot of buzzwords used in the industry. For context, I spent a long part of my career as a salesperson in the industrial automation space, and I just wanted to have conversations in a more authentic way, right? Talk about topics impacting our industry the way you would as if you're having a beer with someone. And that's really the whole premise of Manufacturing Happy Hour. It is a weekly podcast that's like TEDx meets How It's Made. I describe it as a leadership podcast disguised as a manufacturing podcast. And we dive into the stories of manufacturing leaders, learning from their experiences to really figure out how we can all take on the biggest trends and technologies impacting our space. We talk about things like OT security on the podcast, for example, but a lot of it is also around how do you engage the people that you have? How do you recruit the next generation? All topics that I know we're going to cover in some way, shape, or form today as well. So that's a little bit about me and Manufacturing Happy Hour, and I'm excited to bring this style of conversation and kind of be on the other side of the mic today as the guest as opposed to the host. So Jerry, thanks so much for having me.
Sorry, I lost connection for a second.
All good. I
Can
just
you?
finished up my intro.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right. So to dig in, I know we had a bunch of questions right at the top, but since I just mentioned the report, I wanted to focus first on that and then shift into the workforce. So we've talked about the report a bunch, and as we lead into this conversation, are there any key stats, anything from the report that really stood out to you?
A couple of the stats on the first page and then how it tied into the overall narrative I saw behind the report. What I mean by that is seeing some issues where, for example, 50% of downtime being attributed to coding issues, and that cyber breaches are the number one cause of unplanned downtime. As I was reading further into the report, what really stuck out with those two stats was that oftentimes in these downtime situations, I believe you were talking about how ad hoc solutions are what are implemented to get things back up and running. And I kind of took a step back to reflect on that, and maybe I'd like to hear a little bit of your perspective on this. It almost feels like this just creates like a cycle of pain over and over and over again. If you're relying on ad hoc fixes all the time, are you really going to be complying to, let's say, cybersecurity standards and protocols as you're going through those ad hoc fixes? And if cyber breaches are the number one cause of are the number one cause of unplanned downtime, and I was just starting to put the pieces together and thinking to myself, it's like, gosh, if you don't have an approach to industrial DevOps that's more disciplined, you'll continue to find yourself being one of these stats that are mentioned in the report because it'll just repeat over and over. Ad hoc solution, another issue. Ad hoc solution, another issue. That was my biggest takeaway behind the overall narrative of the report.
I love that you called that out. So there's a couple things, and one, I'm going to move back in time for a second. But since before I came to Copia, I worked at Rockwell. That's, I think, how we first met, Chris.
Mhm.
Um, and I was leading the State of Smart Manufacturing report. So I've been running these studies and doing this research for a long time. And one of the underlying currents around every technology conversation I have is the importance of process. And then before process, the importance of people, like really honing in on who your people are, thinking about your workforce, which is the whole theme of today, and supporting them for success by giving them a process that's going to work. And when I found that ad hoc stat, 80% of people are doing ad hoc fixes to avoid downtime. It's like, God, how would that feel? I'm like putting myself into their shoes. If you know the cost of downtime is so painful, you need to get back up and running, and you were on the line, you were wherever trying to get that back up and running as fast as humanly possible, and then to maintain it so it doesn't happen again. Like that amount of pressure has got to be just a really uncomfortable working environment. And then thinking about like how do you retain people if you put them in that situation? And there's so much more to unpack, but last thought with that is I'm digging deeper in this year's report. The survey is going to be launched, I think, this week, to get more data around that and to be able to correlate, are the people that are doing these ad hoc fixes all the time the ones that are experiencing the highest levels and most costly levels of downtime? And is there attrition in their workforce as a result?
One of the things that I reflect on is, going into end user facilities in like the early 2010s, and it's not just the job satisfaction, it's the mentality you end up taking around your work when you're constantly in that situation. You just start showing up to the factory, to the plant, to the facility, wherever it is, not knowing what your day is going to look like that day because you are in emergency mode. And even if you can thrive under that type of pressure and under that type of environment, I don't think that's the majority of people. Uh, that's the type of thing that I just step back and think about where it's like, gosh, if someone has that type of energy and that ability to constantly firefight like that, imagine if they were in a situation where they had the processes and they had the plant leadership that were able to channel that energy into more proactive activities. That's what sticks out to me when I walk into a facility or see an operation that runs in that ad hoc sort of fashion.
Totally. Yeah. Just picturing how you could empower those people in the right situation, it would be almost like they have superpowers to be able to just accomplish so much more. And the cascading effect when you have your stars performing and able to perform at that highest level, how that brings everyone up with it. So
Exactly.
the next question I had for you, Chris, kind of builds off this. We've talked about the Great Resignation. I plugged that into the description of this fireside chat. And when we are doing our pre-meeting, you had some great thoughts about reframing, recalibrating what the Great Resignation and workforce perspective means. Could you please share those?
Yeah, and I'm thinking I should have looked up some more stats on this to back this up, but I'm going to share my perspective on this because when I hear about the Great Resignation, what term we started hearing quite a bit, 5 years ago when COVID was starting to take place, I actually see this as a potential opportunity for the manufacturing industry because When I picture the Great Resignation, I picture folks that are sick and tired of their restaurant job or sick and tired of their desk job, their office job, and realizing it's like, I can survive for a while without having to work. So I'm not going to go back to work. Where I think of the manufacturing industry, and I would think a lot of people in our space look at the great retirement, as I believe you and I called it, as the bigger issue, right? There aren't enough young people in the manufacturing industry that are the part of the great resignation right now. I am more concerned about all the generational 30, 40-year folks that have been in this industry for a while walking out of the industry without any way of capturing their knowledge. So I'm not going to give away everything that I imagine will come up in other answers, but I think the great resignation is an opportunity to pull some of these folks in that might be jaded by other industries into what is now a more high-tech, technology-driven manufacturing industry, unlike the ones that certainly we saw 40 years ago, but even vastly different from the manufacturing operations we might have seen even 5 to 10 years ago. So I think this is an opportunity for the manufacturing industry if we can capture some of that talent that is retiring rather than resigning per se.
I love that perspective. And I think that leads into our next question, trying to unpack this a little more. I'm thinking about with this great retirement, what happens with knowledge loss? And are there ways, examples maybe you've seen on your show that have helped with that transition?
Yeah, I actually think this is one of the best applications of artificial intelligence in the manufacturing industry. And before I get folks thinking we're going to go down some complex AI conversation right now, I'm going to keep it really basic. Leveraging artificial intelligence can be a way to help retain some of that knowledge that's going to be walking out the door and help disseminate that 30, 40-year-old experience that's been around the plants and facilities for that long, help disseminate that knowledge across everyday workers. Have talked about this with a couple people. Andrew Hastert from Rockwell Automation, for example, one of the places that I refer to as our corporate alma mater a little bit. I've had this conversation very recently. In fact, this episode will be out next week in mid-April 2025. I was speaking with Kent Anderson at Composable. When they talk about artificial intelligence, they're talking about it in the context of building a database of skills of the rarest knowledge within inside of your facilities and start having that as something that can then be accessed by, let's say, AI agents, or if you're a company that has a maintenance worker that's been there for 20 years, for example, and you have an issue on the conveyor and you're trying to figure out what it is. Well, that 20-year maintenance worker can probably just listen to what's going on in the panel and say, "Oh, it sounds like we have a faulty drive in there. Let's swap that out." If you start capturing that information across your facility and building that database of skills and insights, in the future, you can start getting that saying, "Hey, this issue is taking place right now. Here is the solution." Artificial intelligence won't just, say, "Hey, here are the weird patterns that we're seeing." As we're seeing with Chat GPT right now, it can give you that information saying, "Hey, it looks like there's a faulty drive right now based on what we're seeing. It's time to go fix that."
That's great. And I love that you grounded it in the practical uses of AI. Again, going back to your lead in of not having the jargon and the buzzwords, but thinking about how this really can be used. And I'm also thinking about the next generation of the workforce coming in. Did you have any thoughts around how this can help with that, both attracting the next generation and retaining them into manufacturing?
One of my a perspective that I don't feel gets shared enough when it comes to attracting the next generation that I try to share any opportunity that I get is we talk about how technology and robotics and a good work environment will be attractive to getting the next generation into the manufacturing industry. And that is all true. Those are all pieces that need to be in place to make it a place that will attract and get people to stay. But I think one of the topics we don't talk about enough is what will really be a catalyst for getting people into the manufacturing industry or getting the next generation into the manufacturing industry is when an 18-year-old sees one of their peers that's 22 or 23, that's 4 or 5 years ahead of them, working in the industry, killing it, not having a lot of debt, making good money, having job satisfaction because they're solving cool problems every week, some combination of that, right? That's what I think we need to be talking about more and highlighting more as we have these discussions of attracting and retaining people into the industry. We need to have the foundation there, right? You got to have good programs, benefit programs that are attractive. Don't be a dull, dirty, dangerous facility. Be one that is technology enabled. But beyond that, we got to be focusing on how are we seeing stories shared from, 23, 25-year-olds that have just entered the industry. How is that getting disseminated down to their peers that also look at this and be like, hey, this is actually a career path that I would like to start pursuing and putting in the legwork to pursuing now. That's my take on that. And I can share examples of where I'm even starting to see it play out today. I think we're in the beginning phases of this being a trend in our industry, but it's getting folks that are young, seeing other young folks, seeing their peers having success and fulfillment in the industry.
I love that. I love how you mentioned storytelling because I have been such an advocate of storytelling to convey a message for so long. It's the best way to get people to like hear, learn, and I mean, since throughout human history, storytelling is the way you teach lessons, you recruit people to come along to what you're into. You do such great storytelling with manufacturing happy hour. Do you have any storytelling advice or guidance for how storytelling can be used in this way within manufacturing?
Yeah, I'll kind of take a three bullet approach to this because I'm constantly organizing and reorganizing my thoughts around the storytelling topic. The first thing I'll say is this is the most basic. Don't overcomplicate it and don't sound like everyone else. If you think your secret sauce to storytelling is saying how your company is an AI driven something or other, that's table stakes at this point. People are just expecting that you are leveraging the latest technology, which in this case is artificial technology, that you are leveraging the latest technology to give yourself a competitive advantage. I feel like too many people, and this is almost like pre-storytelling advice, like they get the fundamental tagline or narrative wrong and they try to build it around something that is just a me too that everyone else has versus a true differentiator. So that would be tip number one. Don't try to sound like everyone else. You need to find what is going to be your unique hook, your unique story that will get people in the door. The other thing I'll say about storytelling is you have to be consistent with it. And I think in the corporate world, in the business world in general, a lot of times when we think of a story or storytelling, we think about it in the context of a success story, a case study that takes 6 months to publish to get all the stamps of approvals from the different customers and partners that are involved in that story. Or you think about it in terms of this expensive video that might be a case study, might just be a highlight reel of what's going on inside of your facility. Again, you need those type of things, but to be really competitive with storytelling, I mean, take this thing out, your phone, on a regular basis. Like, I want to see the owner of a machine shop going out on the floor saying, hey, this is something we ran into today, or this is something we ran into last week, right? Obviously, you don't want to give away anything proprietary, but just tell a quick story into your phone about this is what we're seeing on our factory floor. Here's how we're solving these problems. Hey, is this helping you as a manufacturer, right? Respond in the comments, post it to LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever it is, right? Start the dialogue that way. You start doing that on a regular basis and showing your expertise as a CNC shop, showing your expertise as an automation company, showing your expertise as, I don't know, stamping metal, for example. There are a lot of different directions we can go with this, but just start showcasing that on a regular basis in a very raw format. Leverage the free tools that are available to you, like social media, and just get that story out there on a regular basis. And the last thing I'll say is, I would imagine what I just said is probably resonating with a few people, maybe not everyone, but a handful of people that are watching this right now that are like, yes, I've been telling our management team we need to do this for a long time. We need to just be more raw and, off the cuff and authentic with our content. Well, if you are that type of person that's thinking it's like, we need to do more of this, you need to be the person that's leading that charge and leading by example, because I have lots of conversations many times with marketing leaders, but other times it's just leaders within a company in general that are like, gosh, we have so many good stories we could be telling, all we need to do is, type up some more LinkedIn posts, share it on our phones, get on more stages. It's like, well, if you think that, you need to be the person that sets that example. I see this all the time with, let's say, sales teams, right? A sales manager is like, gosh, I just wish my team was more active on LinkedIn or with storytelling or whatever. It's like, well, you know, Miss or Mr. Manager, like, what are you doing to be active? Like, you need to be the person that's setting the tone, that's saying storytelling is a priority by telling the story on a regular basis. And again, leading by example.
I love that, and I love the three practical points to approach it. It makes it so much more digestible, and also highlighting like the counterpoints. So I've done all of those case studies, and it is a challenge. I've been lucky with a couple of them that have gone fast, but for the most part, it's challenging because
Mhm.
everyone needs to weigh in and approve. But if you can get those quick videos out, it just shows such a pragmatic approach to displaying how your organization is treating employees or modernizing or working with a process that enforces success. That makes such a huge difference.
Here's one simple way I'll kind of repackage all this here at the end. Let's say it takes 3 months to get a case study done, right? I'm just giving a random timeline to, get the outline done, talk to the different companies, write the initial draft, get it approved, all the fancy things that make it look good. 3 months, approximately 90 days. If that was the only piece of content, the only story you were working on in the meantime, you potentially missed the opportunity to do 90 micro stories on a daily basis that fill that time. And I can tell you 90 small micro stories are going to be more impactful than one mega story, because you're giving yourself 90 chances versus one big chance to reach your audience, and you're getting that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'd love that. Just getting getting moving. Like what I'm hearing is take action, don't overthink it, move forward, and maybe just create these things before you're trying to get buy-in, because trying to get buy-in before you even take action, people don't even know what they're being asked to approve or not approve.
Exactly.
All right. So we've touched on a lot of different topics here, Chris. I know we have a long list of questions, and I'm trying to pick out which would be the next best one. Um, you talked about a bunch of practical strategies to go into. Um, are there any other practical strategies for working on employee retention and traction that you would like to hit on? Any other examples from recent conversations that you've had?
Yeah, I'll mix one in, and you and I have actually chatted about this example before, and it's one I share in a lot of my keynotes when I'm talking about, hey, what are the best lessons I've learned from manufacturing leaders? I was in central Nebraska late last year, exploring the manufacturing scene in that region. And a topic we've been talking about more manufacturing happy hour lately is, hey, what are the issues that rural manufacturers are facing, and what are the issues that urban manufacturers are facing, right? If you're a manufacturer that's in a giant metro area versus one that is in the middle of Nebraska, for example. And I'll give a bit of a spoiler. many of the issues are the same. They're just amplified in different ways. When it comes to being in a rural area, I don't think this will really surprise folks, but you have a smaller talent pool to pull from, and you don't necessarily have people that are actively moving to that region, right? You know, a lot of folks aren't saying, hey, like, I want to move to central Nebraska. You're probably pulling from a lot of people that are from there or from that more immediate region. So, what do you do to be attractive to, let's say, a smaller talent pool? And first of all, you got to build a talent ecosystem, right? You can't just be doing the typical things like putting out the job postings, going to the job fairs. This needs to be a deliberate activity where your company is involved in the community and involved in the community in creative ways. And this is where I'm going to go with this answer. You know, I was speaking with a maintenance leader over at a large manufacturer in the middle of the state. And he was telling me that, like, once or twice a year, he teaches a fluid mechanics class at the local technical college. And when I heard that story, my first response was like, oh, cool. So you have visibility to like straight A students and things like that that you might want to hire later. And his response was like, hey, A students are great, but I also want to find the people that, hey, maybe they don't get the solution right at first, but they're going to put the work in, they're going to figure it out, they're going to find the right answer, a creative answer, whatever it is. But the moral of this story is they're going the extra mile to be involved in their region, and they're going to have first visibility to some of the talent coming through the local pipeline that they can then bring into their company, or even ask proactively saying, hey, you know, we're doing internships this summer, right? There's no reason you can't start getting that out there. And if they're already familiar with the teacher, that person's character, etc., they've got a little bit of a preview to what that company might be able to offer. So whether it's teaching a fluid mechanics class or, you know, giving a talk at a local town hall, whatever it is, right? Be thinking of these outside of the box ways of getting in front of the local talent in your region and take action on that on a regular basis.
I love that. And I've heard of similar examples from conversations you've had on Manufacturing Happy Hour, but also on other manufacturing podcasts. It's those organizations that are looking outside the box to build that pipeline because it doesn't just get them connected to other people. It's also marketing. It's showing the manufacturing is awesome, that it's using cool technology, that it is a job of choice that people should be choosing. I think we pivoted so far away from it when it was the dank, dirty, dark manufacturing of old that people haven't realized how much it's changed. I was doing research yesterday, super cool. From an IoT analytics paper, there are 18.8 billion connected devices. I think it was billion
Mm-hmm.
um, connected devices within manufacturing, and that is set to double over the next 5 years. So anybody going into manufacturing is going to be working with this crazy cool technology and figuring out how to make it amplify the impact of what they're doing. Like there's so much out there to be working with. And are there other examples that you've had, conversations you've had where people are plugging these like great advantages to work with technology to recruit and to get people in and build a process and pipeline?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I think of technology to bring folks into a company, I think it's more about establishing a community that gravitates towards that technology. You know, I was just looking it up. There is a young machinist in our industry, a Swiss CNC machinist, and she recently started a community called Sisterhood of Trades, if you will. And I think you know, and this is a Discord community with over 700 members. You know, Jerry, I know you've spoken to Walker Reynolds before. He also has a very technology driven community as well. I think the more that you can get peers talking to one another about the technology that they're leveraging, and the more, let's say, your company can have folks that are part of those communities, that's going to be the secret, I think, to getting folks to join the organizations, right? If they see other, it's not only about seeing the technology, but it's also seeing other tech savvy individuals that are part of that squad that makes folks want to jump on board. So, having the technology is part of it, but I think maybe the bigger thing is having the other tech heavy users that are proud to be using that technology involved in the communities that are here in our industry, and there are literally dozens of communities in our industry, oftentimes for specific niches. If you can build that, when let's say a company can be the one that builds that community without it feeling like a constant sales pitch for that company, that can be a tremendous competitive advantage when it comes to leveraging technology and what your organization is all about to recruit folks to the team.
I love that. The community focus, and it just, I think a lot of times community is spurred by treating people right. And it makes me think of one of your other examples from a recent podcast, talking to 3M about how they treat their employees. Now, just kind of shifting from that small company to huge global enterprise. I just thought it was extraordinary, if you wouldn't mind sharing that one.
Yeah, last year, literally about a year ago, I was over at 3M, and I was speaking with three leaders within the organization that all happened to be women, right? So the episode we did was focused on what are the things that a company like 3M is doing to empower the women within their organization, for example. And we took it was everything from mentorship to programs like that assist with childcare and things like that. I often talk about this topic in the context of what are attractive elements of your company that are table stakes versus true differentiators. If you're talking about how we have benefits, medical, dental, a 401(k) program, I mean, those are table stakes, right? In this day and age, if you're going to go work somewhere, you're going to have those basics set out for you. But do you have, let's say, what is it, like one of those FSAs for dependent care, for example? Is that available to you? Does your facility, I know this isn't the norm, but does your facility have like a daycare option available as well? Those are the things that not only attract talent, but really speak to the mission. And this was a big part of that podcast you were referring to, where I was talking to these leaders at 3M. It's like, how do we get folks that haven't been in the manufacturing industry? How do we get underrepresented groups to take on these critical roles in the manufacturing industry? And part of it is just creating those opportunities for folks that wouldn't have always had, let's call it the financial freedom to jump into this industry, right? If you have to take care of a kid, hey, manufacturing was not always a space where it had the flexibility for you to raise a kid as well as work a manufacturing job. Now, as companies are creating more programs to accommodate parents, single parents, whatever it is, right? That's where I think we do have a tremendous opportunity to get more folks into this space that want good jobs, are willing to work, but there's some barriers we need to break down to make that possible.
It's such a great example, and it's inspiring to hear such a huge and established organization as 3M thinking outside the box to create a space that's welcoming and doable for diverse populations. And more, especially having worked on this workforce report, I see the competitive landscape. I tapped a report from the Chamber of Commerce that showed since post COVID, people are realizing that there are options. And while they may have been in one particular industry previously, they can go into a lot of different spaces because of the competition for talent out there.
Hmm.
And manufacturing is not competing just for manufacturing talent. Everyone is competing for the pool of available people. And when you differentiate in such a clear way, when you drive community, that makes all the difference in the world. So I haven't plugged this throughout, but I want to plug. We have a Q&A. If anybody in our audience has a question, we're happy to take it live. Please throw it in the box. We have a few more questions to round out the conversation today. And what should we move into next, Chris? So many questions, but
Oh gosh. I mean, you had a pretty stacked lineup. Let me look at my notes as well really quickly. Let's see here.
I was thinking a little bit about the future. We've touched on a lot of present. Would you want to dig into the future outlook a little bit? What we're kind of expecting in terms of trends in this space in the next year, next 3 years, maybe longer?
Yeah, let's dive into that because I'm thinking, hey, what does the future of the workforce look like in this space? Happy to talk to that.
Awesome.
One thing, I'm not sure if there's a specific question, but one thing I was thinking about, I'm always thinking about what is a low barrier to entry, what is a low cost way to get started around a lot of the things we've talked about today. And we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about building community, we've talked about how to showcase your company to attract and retain talent. One thing that I think, would behoove us to talk about is what are like the low cost strategies that can get the ball rolling in the right direction, something that doesn't require capital budget approval. And, we're in an era, especially as we talked about earlier, there are now artificial intelligence tools that can really empower and enable like your every operator to be as good as your best operator on the factory floor. So empowerment is where I would say is not necessarily an easy low cost strategy, but a strategy that to an extent, doesn't cost a big capital expense, but it does require your investment of energy on a regular basis and a willingness, maybe as a leader, to let go of a little bit of control. I think the more we can empower our frontline workers in this day and age, especially as manufacturing makes a comeback here in the US, especially as the younger generation makes their entry into the manufacturing space, the more you can empower a frontline leader, as I like to call them, they don't need to have direct reports to be a leader. The more that the leadership, let's say the traditional leadership within an organization, right? The C-suite, the plant manager, etc., the more that they can empower with technology as well as the ability to make decisions and make mistakes on the factory floor, that is going to be a tremendous differentiator for companies that want to build a place that is attractive. Because I would feel a lot better going to work as someone on the front line if I get to be creative and I'm empowered to solve problems that might come my way throughout the day without having to feel hamstrung or handcuffed to not potentially do the right thing because I don't want to upset someone up the chain or because I'm worried that, hey, if I make a mistake, that maybe there is a slight hiccup in my solution. I don't want to get in trouble for that. The more you can create an environment where you're encouraging your frontline teams to make better decisions that allow you to get more throughput, be more productive, whatever it is, the better off you're going to be. And again, I'm tying this back to what I feel is a strategy that requires a bit of a cultural revolution rather than a massive capital expenditure.
I love that guidance. It looks like we just got a question in, so I'm going to jump to that before asking any more of ours.
Okay.
This one is focused on industrial DevOps. Is there a way to get a list besides asking Reddit of to-do courses, material to prepare to enter industrial DevOps? Examples, what programming languages, OPC, Modbus, SCADA, PLC. Thanks. So educational opportunities for understanding and working in industrial DevOps.
I'm going to Jerry, I'm going to rely on you a little bit for this because you live and breathe this on a regular basis. But my quick answer would be looking for the communities of folks that are speaking about industrial DevOps today. I think Reddit is, and I shouldn't say it's an underrated resource. I think most people are pretty familiar with it. Like that is a tremendous spot to go for these type of conversations. I also see these discussions taking place on LinkedIn on a regular basis. I was sharing a couple of, some of the more industry 4.0 centric communities that I've encountered so far. Those are just a few of my initial examples. Jerry is someone that lives and breathes industrial DevOps on a regular basis. Do you have anything to add?
Yes. So just to reiterate, Reddit's great. If you look in PLC chat rooms, that's where I generally see most of the industrial DevOps conversations. Want to reiterate LinkedIn. I saw a post yesterday asking about how people are managing industrial code and backups, and there were a ton of comments on. So just like following and staying in tune with the conversation where the conversations are happening can be really helpful. And then for more formalized learning, conferences are a great place if you're able to go to conferences. If you're not, YouTube is a great place. For example, Copia, I've been continuing to build out our YouTube channel and have created playlists that show our source control, Git-based source control product for working in and collaborating in industrial code management. So it gives you kind of a step-by-step. Same with Device Link, our backup and disaster recovery tool. And we have a Copilot, which I actually wanted to touch on just from what you were saying before, Chris, because it helps with a lot of the things we talked about. It is, if you are new to a company, it is that like senior controls engineer that just doesn't necessarily have time to answer all your questions. So you can ask it like, what is this code? And it can tell you. Where should I use this AOI? Can it transfer to other places? Can you generate a an AOI for me to get started with programming this PLC? Can you document something that nobody really likes doing? Can you document what this code does so we can put it in our repository and version track it? So there are lots of ways to get educated on it, and there's tools out there once you've moved forward that can help. And we talked about Rockwell before and our history there. I loved it there. And Copia came to me and told me about industrial DevOps. And I was running analyst relations for our entire product suite. And just hearing and reading about what industrial DevOps can do, it just tied into everything I was already working on with State of Smart Manufacturing report, analyst relations conversations, the future of the industry, because it creates a process that supports people and it has a technology that helps people collaborate, helps with knowledge retention, helps with everything that I see is linked to the future of manufacturing and distribution organizations to get people working together and to maximize how people are being impacted and impacting the organization. So I know I touched on a lot there, but just really try to be a part of the conversation where the conversation's happening. YouTube is and has always been an amazing tool for learning and joining webinars. This is a more thought leadership one. We do have demos, and I'm sure other organizations have more of the like learning and demo related content available too. So long-winded answer, a lot of things.
I'm going to tie one of the things you said back into a comment that I heard a while ago. I can't remember where it was, but in order to recruit and retain the next generation, you got to help them help themselves. Like you were just given all these resources and things like that. Like you need to have a facility where if you're trying to troubleshoot a machine, you can access like a YouTube video on how to troubleshoot that machine, for example. So the more you're adding tools like that out there where a young, engineer that's just grown up with all these tools at their fingertips their entire life, unlike myself, where, the internet came about when I was in high school, right? So I've had those tools most of my life, but there are people out there now that's the expectation. They have that type of access at their fingertips at all times. So another way to help recruit the next generation, give them the tools to help them help themselves.
Totally, totally. And the experience that they're looking for, like you mentioned earlier, being able to use the phone, not just to like document success stories on a day to day, but to interact with what they're doing and
Hmm.
have that similar type of UI and experience.
Exactly.
All right, so Chris, we're coming down to round it out and wanted to know if you have any final thoughts, guidance for the audience in terms of taking this conversation forward.
Yeah, if I always try to figure out ways to kind of tie a lot of my lessons together. I think look for ways to empower your frontline teams. Look at them as frontline leaders that are more intimate and in tune with your process than anyone else. I think in the spirit of DevOps, find ways to build in those processes so that way, whether it's coding or handling a maintenance issue or just executing the next project, make sure you're taking a process-oriented approach to these things versus a constant ad hoc, uh, firefighting method that never gets you anywhere. And then for anyone that is looking to make these changes in their organization, whether it's getting that next generation of talent, whether it's leveraging storytelling as a way to get your company and their name out there more, all of the above. If you are the type of person that's sitting there thinking, it's like, gosh, I wish we would do more of that, be the fearless leader that takes up the reins themselves and says, I'm going to start creating this content, or I'm going to start getting involved in these tech communities out there to start making this change for my organization. Don't necessarily look for someone else to give you permission to do it. You're going to need to be the person to take the reins. Those are a few of my closing comments.
I love that. Take action. You own, you control your destiny just by making a decision and moving forward. So I'm going to ask one more time. If there's any last questions, we can address them live. While I'm leaving space for those questions to be entered, I wanted to ask you one more fun question.
Sure.
Of all the manufacturing happy hour episodes you've ever hosted, do you have a favorite or a favorite takeaway that you've learned? And that could be a collaboration of takeaways from multiple conversations, if you like.
Yeah, I've got two answers for this. So, what's one of the best lessons I've ever learned? One of the ones I'm talking about a lot right now is a lesson I learned from Jason T. Ray of Paperless Parts. And he's been on the show twice, once very early on, and then once probably a little over a year ago. He's the founder and CEO of Paperless Parts. And they essentially help machine shops go paperless in a lot of ways. And the lesson he shared with me when we were talking about the skills gap was he said, when you've known something has been an issue for so long, it no longer becomes the skills gap. It becomes a leadership gap, right? It becomes you needing to look yourself in the mirror and say, we know this is a problem. So what am I going to go do to solve it? What is my team going to go do to solve it? So that's kind of a nice wrapper to place all the other pieces of advice that I just gave around it. It's all about taking ownership yourself, and if you know something's an issue, you got to be the person that steps up to the plate to get a solution. I always tell folks it almost feels unfair to pick a favorite episode, so I always pick a very unique episode that I did as one of the ones that stands out. For anyone, and I would assume with like a DevOps crowd, they'll know about this video. There was a viral video that like first appeared decades ago, probably on like E-Bombs World in the early days of the internet. Jerry, as a former Rockwell person, you certainly know this video as well. The retro encabulator. For folks out there that don't know what the retro encabulator is, it's this viral, what is best described as a technobabble video, where this individual is basically giving a demo of this product. This product, I believe it's actually a Rockwell MCC, but it's called the Retro Encabulator, and he uses a lot of big words like side fumbling. I don't know what all the terms are specifically, but he basically with a straight face recites nonsense for like 2 minutes. And this guy is an actor, right? They hired him to create this video, back in I think the 80s or something like that. I bumped into him at a trade show one time, probably in like late 2021, early 2022, and I just recognized his voice. And I asked him, it's like, hey, would you be willing to go on the podcast and give like the oral history of the Retro Encabulator? And he did. So episode 66 of Manufacturing Happy Hour is an interview. It's the oral history of how the Retro Encabulator video was made. And for people in our industry, it's a very niche, very hilarious video. So that's one of my all-time most memorable interviews.
Oh man, I'm so glad I asked that question because haven't listened to that one. I'm definitely going to check it out after this.
It's a very fun
Uh,
one. I think you'll enjoy it again, especially as a Rockwell and automation industry alumni.
Totally. All right. So to round it out, Chris, where can we find you? Where can our audience connect with you?
Absolutely. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I try to post daily, and I also respond to comments as well. It's not just me showing up there and sharing my stuff. I want to be part of the conversation, just like I was encouraging everyone else here to do today. So connect with me personally on LinkedIn, and then for finding Manufacturing Happy Hour, honestly, if you Google Manufacturing Happy Hour, it's going to be all the first hits on Google. But Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your shows, you should be able to find it there.
Awesome. I highly encourage anybody that came here to do it, check it out, and encourage everybody you talk to. Chris, thank you again so much for taking the time. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I always learn new things, and I really appreciated the conversation today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me, Jerry, and looking forward to seeing you around the industry soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it, and thanks to our audience for joining. Everybody, take care.
Cheers.